Western Orthodoxy. Western Orthodoxy is a small and unusual branch of Christianity. It is not Catholicism and it is not Eastern Orthodoxy, but something in between. It includes groups like the Celtic Orthodox Church and the French Orthodox Church. Unlike Western Rite Orthodoxy, which is simply Eastern Orthodoxy with Anglican-style liturgy, Western Orthodoxy is not in communion with mainstream Eastern Orthodox churches, even though it shares most of their theology and traditions. This movement began when certain Catholic priests in France and Ireland left the Catholic Church and entered into Eastern Orthodoxy. Over time, disagreements led them to separate even from Eastern Orthodoxy itself, forming their own independent churches. Today, Western Orthodoxy is extremely small, but it still exists as a distinct identity, defined by its attempt to mix Orthodox theology with Western traditions while remaining outside both Rome and Constantinople. True Orthodox Church. The True Orthodox movement is a breakaway from mainstream Eastern Orthodoxy. Its members believe they are preserving the most authentic form of the faith. The main dispute that caused their separation was the adoption of the Western calendar by some Orthodox churches. In Orthodoxy, the liturgy is seen as the very essence of the faith. Changing the calendar means changing the liturgy, and changing the liturgy is considered changing the faith itself. Because of this, the True Orthodox condemned not only the Orthodox churches that adopted the new calendar, but also those that remained in communion with them. As a result, they declared themselves to be the one true church, rejecting both Catholicism and mainstream Orthodoxy as compromised. They apply the rulings of the ancient church councils with far more strictness, and in their eyes, ecumenism, cooperation with other Christian groups, is a betrayal of the faith. Despite being a minority, they maintain significant numbers in certain countries and remain one of the most conservative expressions of Christianity. Russian Old Believers. The Russian Old Believers are another group that broke away from Eastern Orthodoxy, but their split happened much earlier. In the 1600s, the Russian Orthodox Church introduced a series of liturgical reforms at that time, and the Old Believers rejected them completely. One example was how to make the sign of the cross. The official church said it should be done with 3 fingers, symbolizing the Trinity. The Old Believers insisted it must be done with 2 fingers, as it had been practiced before. For them, these details were not minor. They represented the true ancient faith. Because Orthodox Christianity ties faith so closely to liturgy, the Old Believers saw the reforms as corruptions. They separated and preserved older traditions, often living in small traditional farming communities. To this day, they can be found in rural parts of Russia, as well as in Orthodox immigrant communities in places like Alaska and Oregon. Many live a lifestyle that resembles the Amish in its conservatism, holding tightly to what they see as the unchanging truth of orthodoxy. British Orthodox Church. The British Orthodox Church stands out because, unlike the other groups connected to Eastern Orthodoxy, it belongs to the Oriental Orthodox tradition. Oriental Orthodoxy separated from Eastern Orthodoxy back in the year 451 at the Council of Chalcedon. The key disagreement was over the nature of Christ. Eastern Orthodoxy teaches that Jesus has 2 natures, human and divine, united in one person. Oriental Orthodoxy, on the other hand, teaches that Jesus has only one nature, a divine-human unity. The British Orthodox Church follows this Oriental Orthodox theology and liturgy. What makes it unusual is its claim that ancient Celtic Christianity was actually Oriental Orthodox in character, and that it is reviving this forgotten tradition. Because of this belief, it exists outside mainstream Oriental Orthodoxy while still identifying with that heritage. Though small, the British Orthodox Church represents a striking blend of theology from the ancient Near East, with the cultural identity of Britain presenting itself as the heir to a lost form of Christianity that never fully existed in the way it imagines. Old Catholics. The Old Catholic movement began in the 19th century after the First Vatican Council. At that council, the Roman Catholic Church officially declared the doctrine of papal infallibility, that, under certain conditions, the Pope cannot be wrong when defining matters of faith or morals. A group of Catholics rejected this teaching, claiming it contradicted earlier councils and traditions. They broke away and called themselves Old Catholics, believing they were preserving the older, purer Catholic faith. Over time, Old Catholic churches developed their own identity. They often look similar to Roman Catholic churches in worship style, but they tend to be more theologically flexible. Many allow married priests, some ordain women, and they reject the idea of centralized authority in Rome. They also share strong ties with certain Anglican groups, sometimes entering into communion with them. Today, Old Catholics are a small but enduring movement. Their distinctiveness lies in being Catholic in appearance and tradition, while rejecting one of Catholicism's central defining features, the authority of the Pope. Sedevacantism comes from the Latin phrase sedevacante, meaning the seat is vacant. This movement claims that there has been no legitimate pope since the reforms of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. Vatican II introduced new teachings, such as recognizing Protestants as separated brethren and acknowledging that Muslims worship the same God. Sedevacantists see these as betrayals of traditional Catholic doctrine. As a result, they argue that every pope since Vatican II is invalid and that the papal throne has been empty for decades. Some groups have gone further by setting up their own parallel papacies, the most famous being the Palmarian Catholic Church in Spain. That group even teaches that both Jesus and Mary are physically present in the Eucharist. Sedevacantists often present themselves as the true guardians of Catholic tradition. They emphasize strict adherence to pre-Vatican II teachings and reject the modern Catholic Church as apostate. Though small, they are highly vocal and have built networks of churches, websites, and media outlets dedicated to proving their claim that the papacy itself has gone astray. Netherlands Reformed Church. The Netherlands Reformed Church is a tiny, very conservative branch of the Dutch Reformed tradition. It is known for its hyper-Calvinist theology, which takes the doctrine of predestination to extreme conclusions. According to their teaching, the covenant of grace, the promise of salvation through the gospel and sacraments, applies only to the elect. In practice, this creates a very restrictive church life. Members are taught that they should not take communion unless they are absolutely certain they belong to the elect. As a result, congregations may have large attendance, but very few people actually receiving the sacraments. Worship is marked by seriousness, with women wearing head coverings and a strong emphasis on rules and moral discipline. This group separated from mainstream Dutch Reformed churches because they opposed offering the gospel freely to everyone. For them, the gospel is only truly meant for those predestined to salvation. This approach has led to widespread struggles with assurance of salvation among members, as many are left unsure whether Christ's promises apply to them personally. Primitive Baptists emerged in the early 1800s during the Second Great Awakening in the United States. While most churches at that time were enthusiastic about evangelism and missionary work, the Primitive Baptists rejected these efforts. Their reasoning was rooted in predestination. If the elect are already chosen by God, they will be saved no matter what, even without hearing the gospel. Because of this belief, Primitive Baptists often opposed organized missions, Sunday schools, and other forms of outreach. For them, preaching does not bring people into salvation. It only informs those already chosen. Some branches took this logic further and became universalist, teaching that eventually everyone would be saved, since God's will cannot be resisted. In worship, Primitive Baptists maintain a simple and traditional style, often with unaccompanied hymn singing and little emphasis on formal structure. Their refusal to evangelize set them apart sharply from other Baptists, and their theology represents one of the most radical applications of Calvinist thought in a Baptist setting. Waldensians. The Waldensians began in the 12th century with a merchant named Peter Waldo. He chose to live in voluntary poverty, preaching against the wealth and corruption of the medieval Catholic Church. The movement emphasized simplicity, the authority of Scripture, and preaching in the language of the people rather than in Latin. The Waldensians rejected several Catholic teachings, including purgatory and transubstantiation. Instead of believing that the bread and wine literally become the body and blood of Christ, they taught a spiritual presence of Christ in communion. They also promoted early translations of the Bible so that ordinary people could read it. For these reasons, they were condemned and excommunicated by the Catholic Church. Despite persecution, the Waldensians survived for centuries in remote areas of the Alps. When the Protestant Reformation began in the 1500s, most Waldensians joined the Reformed churches because their theology was already very similar. Even so, some Waldensian congregations remain today, especially in Italy, carrying forward a tradition of reform that predates the Protestant Reformation itself. Ancient Church of the East. The Ancient Church of the East is a recent offshoot of the Assyrian Church of the East. which is historically tied to Nestorian Christianity. Nestorius was a 5th-century bishop who refused to call Mary the Mother of God, arguing instead that she should be called the Mother of Christ. This teaching was condemned at the Council of Ephesus, but his followers continued and spread eastward into Persia, India, and even China. The Assyrian Church of the East has preserved this Nestorian heritage for centuries. In the 20th century, however, a dispute arose over adopting a new calendar, similar to the conflict that created the True Orthodox. Those who opposed the calendar change split off and formed the ancient Church of the East. In effect, this was Nestorian True Orthodoxy, committed to holding firmly to older traditions without compromise. One notable figure, Mari Emmanuel, later separated even from this group and became a non-denominational preacher. His influence has attracted attention online, creating the unusual situation of a modern internet preacher coming out of a very ancient and obscure Christian background. The weirdest denominations are fascinating, but what about the groups that went so far they became full-blown heretical cults? My companion video takes you through all of them, step by step. If you enjoyed this breakdown, you'll love the next one. Every heretical cult explained.